everybody. Welcome back to the Everyday Night. I'm Joe.
And I'm Jeff.
And Jeff, hoping that we don't suddenly lose our recording capability because we've got some thunderstorms passing through. Um,
I think they've passed through here. You're about 45 minutes
yeah,
further on in the path of the storm, so
yeah,
I seem to have survived
hear
it, so
the
hopefully you will too.
I can hear the rumbling, and Hank, our basset hound, hears the rumbling. He doesn't like storms, so but hopefully it'll all go through just fine. So, you did I su I suggested this? You reminded me I suggested this. I forgot I suggested this.
Yeah,
You
so that
suggested that I suggested it.
like yeah, you suggested it and then forgot about it, and then I brought it up and you went, "I'm not sure what that is." And I
Yeah,
so I send
okay.
you back the little
Well,
thing that
yeah, the thing that I sent you about it. So the thing we're going to talk about is a concept from a 14th century historiographer, historian, philosopher,
right?
thinker. Um, Abu Zayd Abd al-Rahman ibn Khaldun, often just referred to as
Ibn Khaldun.
Ibn Khaldun. And
Ibn, like
Ibn,
the 13th warrior, right?
yeah. So
Ibn.
it is that was a good movie.
It
Um,
was good. I mean, Michael Crichton writes better movies than he does books.
well, the thing is, there was his books are
S
essentially,
Screenplays.
they're concepts for screenplays. Yeah. The there was I read something similar, had similar elements. There was a really good novel called Byzantium,
Hmm.
that was really good. Um, but I thought that was going to be what it was about, but it was similar, but not the same story. Um, so anyway, Ibn Khaldun uh, developed a what is often referred to as a sociological approach to history, and that way of thinking about history has actually been widely adopted. And he proposed something he called the cycle of empires.
Hmm.
And the empire cycle, describing a predictable pattern of rise and fall for dynasties and civilizations. S-
Speaking of predictable patterns,
yes,
before we get into the subject too far,
yes.
what are you drinking this evening?
Well, today was a really hot day and we're having more, and I have returned to what is fast becoming one of my favorite summer cocktails. And this is Absolute Juice, they call it, which is Absolute vodka with pear and um, elderflower flavoring, a little bit of lemon juice, and some Fever Tree light tonic water,
Hmm.
and a couple of large ice cubes. And how about you?
I have got nearly the last of my bottle of Indiana Distillery's Breakfast of Degenerates, which is a bourbon whiskey aged in maple barrels.
That should be a chaser for what's the beer? Dirty Bastard division beer. Because
Well,
they seem
there's
to sound like they go together. So,
yeah, well, yeah, kind of, yeah.
yeah.
Uh, but it's just got a hint of maple sort of aftertaste. Otherwise, it's just kind of a straight bourbon, Kentucky style bourbon whiskey. But
I've made an old fashioned with bourbon and using maple syrup instead of
simple
the
syrup.
simple syrup or sugar cube. I usually saturate sugar cubes with both orange bitters and chocolate bitters,
Oh,
and then
hmm.
muddle those and add the bourbon, little bit of water to help the sugar dissolve. I like the process, you know.
I've been making old fashions with a maple bitters lately,
Yeah,
and that's come off pretty good
yeah.
with the fever. And also my usual sort of bourbon, fever tree, ginger beer,
Yeah.
not tonic, but ginger beer, and the maple bitters.
I actually started using something I saw in a restaurant. They did this. It was a great idea for a smoked old fashioned or any
Yep,
kind of
I've seen
smoked
those.
drink, but they put the ingredients in a bottle and then they put the smoke in the bottle, close the bottle, and then um um
Agitate it.
agitate it. And it really does a great job infusing the entire drink with the smoke, and that's
And
really good.
I've had those and they're okay from time to time, but the smoke becomes a little overpowering and almost an oily
Yeah, it can,
quality.
it can. One absolute word of caution based on my own experimentation: do not try to use liquid smoke to achieve a smoke flavor in a cocktail. It's a disaster. Um,
I I'm going to try hard not to imagine.
oh, terrible. I've used liquid smoke in some sauce
Yeah, sure.
recipes, good, but not, oh, not in a drink. No. Well, here's to you.
Okay. Cheers. Okay.
So, a little bit
So,
of, yeah, a little bit about Ibn Khaldun. Um, he was a scholar, a thinker, as I said, historian. He lived in the 14th century, which was a really turbulent century. If anybody's ever read um, histories of the 14th century, that there's some really good ones. Barbara Tuchman's History of 14th Century. Um, but he saw he observed from a distance. He traveled a lot, and
mhm.
but he was also there was a lot of exchange of information. So he was aware of the battles of the Hundred Years' War. It wasn't called that then. Um, the expansion of the Ottoman Empire, decline of Byzantium, the epidemic of the Black Death, all sorts of things like that. And so he came up with this idea called the empire cycle or cycle of empires. And so his first point,
Oh, I wanted to point out
yeah,
that this has
good.
become pretty much an academic, almost a dogma that
Yeah.
historians since then have really leaned into these five ages of empire that we're
Yeah,
about.
which is first of all, though, it does beg the question, what is an empire? And we'll come back to that.
Yes.
Um, but he said that found a nation or empire in its founding requires a social cohesion in the people. It's the term he used the term
Asabaya,
asabaya,
Asabaya.
asabaya. Um, it's
Clearly a Arabic word.
yeah, well, yeah, as he was, and so it's he said this is unity or bond, social cohesion, and that's usually strongest among people who are in harsh conditions and in opposition, and it weakens when the people settle down to a life of relative luxury and become complacent.
Right.
And it reminded me of the saying that um, hard life makes a strong person, and
Strong person makes an easy life.
makes an
Easy
easy
life makes a
life.
weak
It's yeah.
person.
So yeah. Um, so first, he says that he argues that an empire will rise and fall within 5 generations. You have to consider what a generation is and what that meant and what a
Right.
generation means now. It's not the concept that we often have now when we think of demographic groups, because those are a much shorter time period. Because, we've
Right.
had in 50 years, 50, little more like 70 years. Baby boomers, um, Generation Jones, Gen X, millennials, um,
Gen
Gen
Z
Z,
and Gen Alpha.
and Gen Alpha. So those are how many generations in a much so it's demographic changes, but that's represents the
Well, and
increased pace of society, changes,
those,
changes in
yeah, and those
society.
are super
They're marketing
amorphous
terms.
terms. I mean, there's
Yeah,
lots of overlap,
yeah.
and those
Well,
are defined, I
they're
think,
not
more
official
by,
they're not
hmm?
officially defined scientifically. They were developed as marketing terms. So
Yeah, right. And they've sort of there's this sort of unofficial breakdown of what year you were born in, and it's like
yeah,
astrology in that way.
yeah,
But it's also, like you said, it has less to do with the years than it has to do with how societal change within this
yes.
time period.
Yep.
So
So
that's probably closer to his generational definitions
yes.
than actual physical age
Yeah.
generations of parents and
Well,
children and grandchildren.
yeah, and I think as generations, I would call them phases rather than generations, the way he describes it.
Yeah, for our purposes of this
Yeah.
discussion,
Yeah.
certainly.
So first there's conquest. It was fascinated me that he defines the establishment of a country as conquest of a united people with that social cohesion, that asabaya, conquering and establishing themselves. Um,
Well, yeah, but I think it could also um, refer to conquering a frontier.
it could it could also refer to throwing off uh, the yoke of a colonial power,
Or,
conquering
yeah,
it in that way. So you could
right.
say
Or just revolution, you could
yes,
say.
it could. So that the intent rather than the literal meaning, though that may have been his experience of how countries are started or empires are started by conquest. Um, and then second, a move from a community-based rule to power consolidated within a government.
Right. The second phase.
Yes. And so that says to me, well, you're not going to have a revolution and a conquering of an existing empire with a community-based rule unless you're talking very small numbers of people.
Right.
Because that kind of community consensus, that sort of thing, only works up to a certain number of people. And beyond that, you need more organization to actually get
Right.
something done. And the definition of that becomes a government. So again, I think it's as always, how do you define the terms? What's the context of it? And then phase three is the golden age of a wise and prosperous ruler and administration. Okay. Yeah, okay.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm not sure we could almost flip a couple of these.
Yes.
The consolidate, going back to the second one for a second, the consolidation of power is the sort of recognition that some kind of centralized government is necessary if this is to remain some kind of contiguous national identity.
Yes. And not get conquered very quickly by another entity.
Right. So you're
Yeah.
you're starting with a tribal sort of mentality, but as we've talked about, tribal mentality and uh, communism, uh,
Yeah.
that is to say, acting as a commune doesn't scale.
No, it's yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, at some point you have to recognize that, okay, we can't govern by chieftains anymore.
Yeah. Representatives of those tribes or communes to a larger entity to yeah, and so on.
Right.
Um, So then the Golden Age is third. Fourth, the creep of overconfidence, vanity, corruption, selfishness into a culture.
Right.
Um, and finally, defeat and loss of power to a new group with strong social cohesion and asabaya. And that's his cycle, his empire cycle. Um, and it does. Oh, there's so much to consider in this when thinking about the current situation that we find ourselves in.
Well, what people have been talking about lately are talking about the end of the United States empire and the um, yeah, the collapse of late capitalism and so on.
Yes, and I think they're, um, the fall of Rome, more like the fall
Yeah.
of Rome, and um, there are, there were mad emperors in
Certainly.
in Rome. Uh, there was the founders of the United States certainly were aware of Ibn Khaldun's empire cycle,
Almost certainly.
and they were very well educated, scholarly, mostly, um, and were aware of it. And so there were several things they did that were supposed to avoid or prolong or forestall this empire cycle. And they're tied to a concept that's referred to as American exceptionalism.
Right.
And the idea of American exceptionalism is that the United States is unique um,
Or was.
because or was well is that because of its focus on democracy that anyone can become an American if you accept American ideas, the values of of a representative democracy, hard work, free enterprise, that sort of thing. Um, and several of the things that were designed into the structure of the United States and the Constitution were supposed to avoid the cycle of empires. The separation of powers was one of those.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
and the
checks and
fact that,
balances. Yeah.
sorry.
Checks and balances.
Oh,
Yeah.
right. Well, I think that we are distinguished somewhat from an empire is that we don't have an emperor. And part of the we've talked about this a little bit that the golden age and prosperity can be brought about by a a single benevolent, brilliant leader.
Yes.
Okay, and kind of like varietal wines versus blended wines is with a varietal wine you can occasionally have an incredibly valuable, amazing vintage, but you can also have a horrible crop and a terrible vintage. And varietals and blended wines, you tend to get pretty good most of the time.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I think the our founding fathers, so to speak, were shooting for.
Well, they
Was
drank a lot, so
they
maybe,
say, and they understood the difference.
yeah.
But so I don't know that if you and I had to pick a golden age of prosperity, it would be very difficult to do. It's like this was our golden age. Um, Although you and I, within our lifetimes, have seen the tail end of what I think of as a
Yeah.
golden
Yeah.
age, which is to
And
say not the same as the Gilded Age.
but no. And it's interesting that in times of relative peace and prosperity, what you'll see what we have seen in history is social movements for greater equality, greater rights. So you look at the period from a few years, well, the baby boom era, a few years post World War II until roughly the start of the fall with Reagan. Those years of relative prosperity, well,
I'd go
maybe
all the way
till
back.
70, early 70s when the OPEC oil crisis hit.
Yeah, I'd go all the way back
Um,
to Nixon for the start of the fall, but
yeah, well, yeah, yeah. I'd say the early 70s, um, the oil crisis, long lines for gas, the rising gas prices, all of that. But in that 20 year, 20 15 to 25-year period, the relative prosperity. And,
hmm
there was, I'd say after the end of the Korean War, maybe even during it, because it affected so few people in the country, until really Vietnam became a big issue that started the relative prosperity gave rise to social movements because people could do that, take the time to do that, and not worry about employment and income and that sort of thing. And the um, the harsh response to that and the struggle for that actually it as more people came on board with those ideas, increased unity, social cohesion, um, and then that all started to decline. Um, but that was one of the ideas anyway. Separation of powers, um, bases, not places. That not no col not colonizing places, but
right.
having military bases, but definitely not. There was not supposed to be colonies. They were stationed there are in co other countries that by those other countries' permission. There are exceptions to that. There were colonies, the 19th century, um, certainly the United States had territories
And we still do.
and still do, but they were more like colonies in a lot of ways. Um, um, Even if they weren't that in name. And we still have
Right.
territories. Um, and then
And
the,
some of
the
those over the years have become states, Hawaii, Alaska,
yes, and Puerto Rico should,
right?
but
And
the
there's still Guam.
yeah, the idea that um, rather than that it was economic dominance, the U.S. was the has been, still is for now, the default currency for international trade. And so has that's been a kind of dominance, economic dominance rather than military dominance by conquering, although the United States spends more on its military than the next
Well, it's twice
10.
what the rest of the world spends altogether.
Yeah. So, um, so those are the ideas that were supposed to keep the US from falling into that cycle of empires. Um,
Well, and the express notion that we do not have hereditary classes.
yes,
That was pretty new, certainly unheard of in the 14th century. By
yes,
the 18th century, after the Enlightenment and um, the rise of a middle class, a merchant
yes,
class happened, we got the idea that maybe we can get away from this whole hereditary monarchs and nobility, and maybe everybody could get a fair shot at this.
Yeah, and I think that as far as that goes, we have utterly failed because
Well,
we do
like I said,
have
I think
an
we
economic aristocracy.
we did all right for a while. There's always going to be rich and poor. The United States, for at least for a while, for that 50
Yeah.
year period you're talking about, was designed to build a middle class
Yes.
and constantly expand the middle class. And some people would tip over from the middle class into the upper class,
Right.
to the very rich, and some would inevitably fall into the poor.
Yes. However, and you can trace this back to Reagan's term, that you can see productivity and income rose together, and then you
Yep.
can see at a point productivity kept rising, but income leveled off or dropped, um, whereas the wealthy gained more, and that was because of changes in the tax code. And
Right.
I've explained to people when they point to the taxes, high marginal income tax rates in the 50s and 60s,
Hmm.
said, yeah, that first of all, taxes, you have to understand there's a rate on like th up to this level, it's this rate. And then between this level, it's this rate. This level, that's why, and at the highest level, it's this rate. It's not all of it is not taxed at this high rate. It's it's in
Yeah.
brackets.
Right. It's progressive. That's how
Yes,
that works.
yes. And the very highest income earners back in the day, if they took that money as straight income, they would be charged that high rate in the marginal rate. But if they reinvested that in their business, then that lowered the tax bracket and the money was still theirs. It was just invested. It returned in the business. There were tax breaks for reinvestment. When they retired and sold that business, the money they took out of that then would be charged taxed at a lower rate. So
Right.
the higher tax rate was also tied to reinforcing investment.
Well, and things like public works, there were tax
Yes.
deductions for building libraries, and lots of those, the Gilded Age, lots of those billionaires at the
Yep.
time built massive public facilities,
Yes.
put their name on the front of it, and got a tax break for it.
Yeah. So, and that, but that changed. I mean, the notion that, well, the wealthy are job creators. Well, they only were when the tax rate, the tax structure and the investment structure aligned to do that.
Yeah, incentivize them to do that.
Yes, because otherwise they don't. Um, and so I've had to explain that to those couple of points to people. Um, So I would argue that since then, there's been and now there is an aristocracy. It's an economic aristocracy, and
Hmm.
it's an inherited economic aristocracy because of changes
Inheritance
to,
laws change too.
yes. There was something called the estate tax that there's a fellow by the name of Frank Luntz, who's a pollster and marketing guy who worked for Republicans. He was a consultant, and he came up with terms to he was brilliant, nefarious, brilliant, using his powers not for good by but understanding that what you call something affects the way people think about it.
Hmm.
So he said it's not an inheritance tax because only rich people get inheritances. It's a death tax. He came up with
Right.
the idea of calling it a death tax. And there were lots of things that he came up with that similarly affected the conversation. Um, um, and so many people don't go, well, we've talked about that in the reduction in education funding. So many people don't go past the headlines when
Yeah.
they look at things. Um, so there is increasingly a an American aristocracy, and it's economic. And um, so we've failed on that point. The we
Well,
have
I think we're in the process of failing.
yes,
I think it's still at this point, I want to think it's still salvageable, but
I hope so.
yeah.
But
Well,
you
I
look,
guess that's all I'm doing is hoping, but
there are like legacy admissions to universities is
yep.
another form of aristocracy.
Yep.
Um, I knew, I knew people when I was an undergrad who were legacy admissions, and they were not, despite their advantages of social advantages and obvious education coming into university, they were not always, they were very sociable. They had great social skills, but were not always the most erudite, well-read, hardworking, or smart.
Right.
But they were guaranteed, all they had to do was graduate, and they were
Right.
guaranteed something right afterwards. They had the internships, they had all of that. They didn't have to worry about paying off student loans. Um,
And if you weren't the eldest and going into taking over the business, you got an internship with the government.
or one of daddy's clients or something like that, you know.
Yeah.
Yep. Um, so that's actually development of that has been going on for a while. Um, so you said that, I think you said, I don't know if you said it before when we were talking about this just before we started recording, but we don't have an emperor.
Right.
We are not supposed to. Um, no kings, right?
Right. Right on.
Now maybe I'm actually had a discussion with a friend as to whether that was the persuasive form of messaging, whether it should have been no tyrants, but I've thought, and it's like, okay, I see what your point, but I'm thinking now, no, that was nice. It was pithy. It was clear. And uh, because the current occupant has stated the desire to be a dictator and to essentially be a king, and some of the cult followers have talked about the occupant's children then running for or office or assuming the office despite their even less experience than the
Oh,
current
well, yeah.
occupant. Um, so, um, so cycle of empires. It's something that people should know about, it, understand, and look at where we are in light of that and where we have been and what the founders of the country did to avoid falling into that, um, and see if it's still salvageable.
Well, and there's another aspect to this. The collapse, we talked about the fifth phase here, collapse and replacement. The weakened empire becomes vulnerable to external threats or internal rebellion,
Yep.
right? And that's why it cycles back to the first and why I think rebellion and revolution is another conquest
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
But one of the things that was unknown to and unforeseeable in the 14th century was the globalization. Communications were unimaginable. The kind of communication we have now was unimaginable
Yeah.
in the 14th century. So I think that may also be a saving of humanity, at least, if not individual countries or empires.
Well, I think that, I mean, that was certainly the hope of the internet and quick communication, was that people would have access to information, be able to make better decisions. And now we're flooded with bots and AI and fakes and disinformation and misinformation. And a lot of people don't know how to distinguish facts from fiction, data
Right.
from opinion, evidence from bullshit. And
But
that's,
my point is primarily about the global economy,
yeah,
that you individual countries' economies can't, even ours, even our incredibly powerful economy can't dominate the whole world.
yes. As I hope the occupant is finally discovering with dumbass tariff
Yeah,
ideas.
yeah. I
Um,
haven't heard anybody credibly um, defend the. I mean, tariffs have a place.
it's yeah, but the only defenders of it were it's just a negotiating tool, which is
Yeah, right. And it's a
the
bad negotiating tool. It's causing ill will
yeah.
and distrust throughout the world, throughout
Yeah,
the
the
civilized world.
um yeah,
And
and
it demonstrates a kind of basic misunderstanding or lack of understanding of how the global economy works.
you would think a graduate of the Wharton School of Economics
Yeah,
would.
well, he was probably one of those guys who got his tuition paid and a little extra kick to the university got him in and got him through.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And in fact, he couldn't get into Harvard, which may be one of the reasons he has such a hate, a rage boner for Harvard.
Well, that it
Um,
doesn't surprise me that, I mean, he- everything for him is about prestige, right?
yes,
He would only care about a Harvard diploma for the prestige it brings,
yeah,
not
not for, yeah,
not the education itself. And Harvard, to I guess its credit, there are some candidates who, no matter how much money you throw at them, they will not risk their reputation.
yeah. Um, uh, so Thomas Jefferson wrote um, and presented to Congress before he was president something called the Report on Manufactures. And the Report on Manufacturers was a plan for developing domestic industry
Right,
so that the United States wouldn't be reliant on imports from other countries. And
right,
it involved tariffs as a way of, and we've mentioned this before, tariffs as a way of raising the price on imported goods so that people in the United States could industries either existing or could charge what it would cost, their costs for startup and doing all that, charge it and compete
right.
with it was wasn't supposed to make them more expensive. It was supposed to raise them so they were equal price, and then you could compete on quality. And the
Well, yeah,
but the difference is what was an industry then? This is pre-industrial revolution, really. So
sure.
industry was, a guy, his apprentices, his
Cottage
children's
industries,
cottage industries, right? So weaving and
blacksmithing. I mean, yeah,
the stuff,
furniture making was a
right,
big one. Clock making was another
right.
one.
And so that's what it was designed to do. And I think was it George Washington wore a suit of clothing to his inauguration that was manufactured. The cloth and the construction of it was done in the United States.
Yes, yeah,
Um,
and I don't know. It, it wasn't necessarily to. raise the prices. I mean, it was designed to raise the price, but it wasn't to make them equal. It was in fact, I think, designed to encourage American manufacture
Yeah,
so that it could be produced for a less price because you didn't have to pay to ship it across the ocean.
right. Exactly.
So you could undercut
Yes.
the imported object, even if it was maybe higher quality, right?
Well,
Because it would
yeah,
be a new industry in the States.
but there was also an asabaya, the feeling of I'm gonna, and you still see that. I prefer to buy from somebody I know or somebody locally or somebody
Right.
domestically. You see that now also for there's an ecological environmental reason for doing that. I don't want to pay the shipping cost, not just pay it, but the carbon cost of shipping
Yeah.
things so far.
Not really a
Um,
thing in the 18th century, but
no, no. Um,
if we were still shipping things by sail, it would be completely.
yeah. Um, so um, so anyway, that's kind of a side note on that. But the
So, but yeah, but what my point with global economies now,
mhm,
I think we we're not finding that simply taking over a country for their resources is economically viable anymore.
no, no,
I think what we are struggling with now, which is why we are having so much struggle, is that we are still mired by ideological differences,
yeah,
right? And if whether it's religion or you know whatever it is, I think the closer we get to everybody's kind of realizing that some sort of regulated capitalism works, some kind of limited socialism works, and being able to find a way to meld those together, and reduce income
mhm,
inequality, provide we talk about the cost of universal health care in this country. Other countries do it, no problem. We're the richest country in the history of the world.
yep,
There's no reason we can't do it. I think it should be a point of pride. It should be a perk of coming from the richest country in the world that you've got the best health care and it doesn't cost the citizenship. Because it costs the citizenry a tiny little fraction
yes,
of their income so
yes.
that everybody is healthy.
And the countries that do it, I mean, there are certainly are countries that they have a much higher income tax,
Sure.
but there are also countries like the Scandinavian countries, much higher income tax, but also much happier people,
Hmm.
um, because it covers healthcare and unemployment and retirement and education and a host of other things. And everybody's pitching in, paying their taxes, and everybody benefits. And the I've said before, I think the communism and libertarianism are both fantasies that completely don't understand human nature and don't take that into consideration. And they don't work. And it's not
Not
that
on not
they
on any reasonable scale.
know. And um,
You certainly can't forge an empire. You can't have a national economy under libertarianism.
no,
You can have a sort of limping hom homolog homunculus of an economy under communism, but it's propped up by oligarchy and it's horrible for everybody concerned.
yeah.
So,
Um,
yeah,
so the I think Ibn Khaldun it, everybody should understand what he wrote and what he meant and the context in which he was writing that, and also think about the modern world in light of that and what that means and what the founders of the United States were doing to avoid that and how it's being subverted.
Hmm.
Um, when you've got um, a dismantling of the separation of powers, when you've got the establishing of an economic aristocracy, it reminds me of something that Franklin Roosevelt said in one of his inaugural addresses. He said, um, we will, he said there were uh, in the founding of the United States, I think this was maybe in his first or second inaugural. He said, in the founding of the United States, we were fighting political royalists. And we won. We defeated them.
Hmm.
Now we're in a fight with economic royalists, and we must defeat them. And that was how he viewed the the forces of the moneyed elite, the what people now refer to as the 1%, the robber barons, the that economic aristocracy as
Right.
the economic royalty. And I think he was right then and he's right now. And those people have hated Franklin Roosevelt and what Franklin Roosevelt did. And I remember my father saying to me that he believed that Franklin Roosevelt saved the country. And I think it's
Yeah, there's
absolutely
certainly a good
true.
argument for that.
Yeah. Um, um,
Although you'll still hear people arguing, "Oh, he took us off the gold standard, and that's what's the ruin of this country." And I'm like,
yeah.
really? I mean, we had the robber barons and the economic elite of the time essentially sacked the treasury
Yeah.
of the United States,
Yeah.
and that's why we went off the gold standard because the government didn't own the most gold at the time.
The full faith and credit of the United States. That
Yeah,
was that's the standard. Um, if other countries cannot trust the United States to keep its word, that will go away. I explaining to I would pose this question to students often. I'd say, what is the first essential thing that two people have to do business together? That a
trust,
business, hmm?
trust.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to trust you're going to get what you pay for. You have to trust that the agreements will be kept. You have to trust that,
Um,
libertarians who say we don't need, well, you need courts to enforce contracts, business agreements, establish,
yeah,
you
right.
need,
But that's part of the trust, right? We still
yeah,
have multi-page contracts for everything. Buying a phone, you've got to sign a contract
yeah,
that says you're not going to sue the company for this or that, and like here's the expectations you should have of this product.
yeah,
Sign here that says you agree to all of those limitations and any problems that you may come up.
yeah,
That's still there. The trust has become in a judicial system that backs up the contract,
yeah,
and that's been
yeah,
undermined.
yes. But even if business has those contracts, if a person doesn't believe that they're going to get what they're paying for, they're not going to do business in the
Well,
first
yeah, well,
place.
they're not going to sign the contract.
Right. Um, yeah. So, oh, yeah,
So I want to I think we are at the end of this, but I want to, even though I just pointed out that our friend Eben here couldn't predict where we are now exactly. he was remarkably prescient
Yes.
and incredibly uh, I want to say an innovative thinker, but his parsing of this and breaking these things down in this way is remarkable for the time.
Oh yeah.
So, you know,
Yeah.
hats off to I don't remember his whole name. I should probably honor him with his whole name.
Abu Zaid Abd al-Rahman ibn Muhammad ibn Khaldun al-Hadrami.
Huh. Right. Maybe an acronym we should come.
Ibn Khaldun.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So I'll drink to him, although the prophet would not smile upon me for doing so.
um well there's no grape in this, but
The
prohibition was originally, as I understand it, against grape, but has become much broader against all.
I thought it was against the grain. I thought it was against fruit or grain.
I not my area of expertise. I don't
Uh,
know. I will not claim to know with any certainty at all what's supposed to be. So um so yeah, uh, remarkable thinker, admirable for insight and analysis.
that
Um,
was the word I was looking for. Insightful. Thank you.
yes, very insightful. You're welcome. And useful to think about now.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah,
So
good.
now that we've spent some time educating, we didn't go through the virtues as far as this is concerned, but
Well, yeah, I think that justice, honesty, courage, I'm the virtues of the virtues, I think I didn't mention them. I think they're kind of self-evident in the thinking and in what the founders of the United States were doing to avoid falling into the cycle, to break
yes.
the cycle of empires, and how that's being fucked with
Mm.
now.
Well, and we can certainly look to the virtues for our resistance to
Yes. Yeah.
that fuckery.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Exactly. So I think that's bringing it back to the virtues.
okay. So, well,
And
once again,
perseverance, fortitude
yeah,
in the face of
perseverance,
this.
right?
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
So thanks once again
Yeah.
for coming to our little talk. Um, please share, like, comment. We really love comments. We don't get enough.
Yeah.
Help us out. Uh, and yeah, so
Yeah.
until we see you next time,
Be thou
a good night.
and true.